Welcome to Wine and Wisdom for this week, Parshat Tazria-Metzorah. We always begin by making a bracha hagafen. Please join me if you're having wine. If not, make a shehakol. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Borei Peri Hagafen.
Amen.
Thank you.
In tonight's class, here is Shlomo. Hold on. And tonight's class is called, of course, this week's Parsha is Tazria-Metzorah. And tonight's class is called The Road Ahead is Right. Here it is. How do we go? Back a little bit. There we go. The road ahead is right in front of you. Just take the first step. An effective, piecemeal approach to progress. Tonight's class is sponsored by Phil and Sonia Worshba in loving memory of Phil's brother, who just passed away last week. Phil, are you still in Shiva?
Yes, that's why I drink tonight.
Right, water. But he passed away what day?
Let's see, I think that was on Tuesday, the burial was Friday.
Oh, the burial was Friday. Oh, okay, I didn't realize that. Anyways, so tonight's class is Le'iloi Nishmaso, in his loving memory. His name was Shlomo Chaim Ben Kalman. And for those of you that attended the Journey of the Soul course, you know that, especially during Shiva, this is like a very special time for the Neshama. It's the middle of transitioning from its physical life on this world going up to the heavens. So as always, we'll begin with a Parsha overview first. And Marilyn, can we ask you to read that for us, please? So this is, even though it says Parshat Shemini over here, that seems to be a typo, because it does have the Parshat Tazria-Metzorah overview. So Marilyn, if you can please read for us a little bit about what happens in this week's Parsha.
4 portions of Tazria and Metzorah continue the discussion of the laws of Tumah, Betahara, ritual impurity, and purity. The woman giving birth should undergo a process of purification, which includes immersing in a mikvah, a naturally gathered pool of water, and bringing offerings to the holy temple. All male infants are to be circumcised on the 8th day of life. Tzarat, often mistranslated as leprosy, is a supernatural plague that can affect people as well as garments or homes. If white or pink patches appear on it, does someone else want to read?
I was going to say, Marilyn, would you like to ask someone else? Okay, sure. Why don't I pick up from here for now? Tzarat, which is often mistranslated as leprosy, is a supernatural plague that can afflict people as well as garments or homes. If white or pink patches appear on a person's skin, dark pink or dark green in garments or homes, a Kohen is summoned. A Kohen is a priest, judging by various signs, such as an increase in size of the afflicted area after a 7-day quarantine. The Kohen pronounces it tameh, impure, or tahor, pure. A person afflicted with tzarat must dwell alone outside the camp or city until he is healed. The afflicted area in a garment or home must be removed. If the tzarat recurs, the entire garment or home must be destroyed. When the Metzorah, the person who has tzarat, heals, he or she is purified by the Kohen with a special procedure involving 2 birds, spring water in an earthen vessel, a piece of cedar wood, a scarlet thread, and a bundle of hyssop. Ritual impurity is also engendered through a seminal or other discharge in a man and menstruation or other discharge of blood in a woman, necessitating purification through immersion in a mikvah. Many of you are familiar with these laws. If you're not, that is the structure that we are building outside outside of Chabad, right here, which actually, really by leaps and bounds, I have to say. The tiling is done, which means that the whole room now looks very, very different. It really looks first class. If you're coming this week to Shul, I highly encourage you to ask Rabbi Hanoka for a tour. He'll give you the 5-cent tour, or the 25-cent tour if you're really into it. And he'll take you around. It's really, really beautiful. It's really becoming 5-star. And I think, I just asked Rabbi Hanoka, what was it, yesterday or 2 days ago? I was like, so what is the list of things that needs to be done till we're done? And it's really like 8 things. That's pretty much, obviously each one of them takes a couple days, but we're really, really nearing the end, which is really, really cool. So that is the mikvah. Now today, we're actually going to talk about a mitzvah which wasn't even featured in the Parsha overview because it's really only one verse in the beginning of the Torah, in the beginning of the Parsha, which is the Isha ki Tazria-Metzorah zachar. If a woman should give birth and have a boy, so the Torah tells us that by Yom Hashmini Yimol B'Sar Lato, on the 8th day, you should circumcise his foreskin. Okay. But the topic that we're going to be talking about today is fascinating. And that is, in general in life, an average day is made up of a lot of little behaviors. You know what I mean? Like we have a coffee in the morning and we brush our teeth and there's a long list of things that we do every day without much thought. And a lot of what we do every day is just predicated on what we did the day before. In other words, and every once in a while we're kind of alerted to this. You know what I mean? Like somebody shows you like a life hack. You've been brushing your teeth wrong all this time. You know what I mean? And even if you do try to change that, very often that's very, very difficult to do. It's what we call in English habits, right? And habits obviously can be good or bad. That donut does look good. Thank you, Shlomo. Habits, of course, can be good or bad, but very, very often the word habit has become synonymous with negative tendencies that we have throughout our lives. And when it comes to those negative tendencies, just like the way you brush your teeth, very often it's very difficult to kind of break out of that cycle. We have something, we know we're doing it wrong, we know we're doing it the wrong way, or we know it's a mitzvah that we don't do, we just can't get, and we do it one time, but we cannot get into the habit of doing it. It's very, very difficult. And that's why there's so many self-help books on exactly how to break a habit, whether it's a negative habit, or start a new habit if it's a positive habit. And the question is, when we do try to break those habits, so the example given on the screen here, Shlomo, is a diet, right? So why is it that very often when we start a diet, and we know going into the diet that there's going to be very difficult times, and we're probably going to have a lot of setbacks more than we're going to have advancements, and we take a look at the scale, and finally it says 1 pound more than we're willing to tolerate. I've had it up to here. And we go for it. We say, all right, here we go. I'm going to finally start my diet. Right? What do they say? My diet starts tomorrow. And then in the morning, there's some sort of event that you go to, and somebody has a couple of cookies on the table, and you pop one into your mouth, and 5 minutes later, you're like, oh my God, what did I just do? I messed the whole thing over. And usually that starts a downward spiral where the diet slowly falls apart. Welcome, Aaron. Where the diet falls apart and we start all over again, right? The question on the table for today is, how can we avoid repeating the same cycle that gets us disappointed in the first place? In other words, what was that?
Oh, you said welcome, Aaron. Hello.
Yeah. Aaron, do I know you? Have we met?
Here's.
Oh, hey, Vicky.
How are you? This is my son.
Aaron is your son. Okay, I guess I just didn't recognize the last name. All right. Aaron, it's a good thing you don't have a hacker's face, because as soon as your face came on, I was like, all right, we're safe. Because I was a little nervous. I've been Zoom bound before, if you know what I mean. Okay. So where were we here? So how do we stop the cycle and start doing something good and not let the cycle, the bad cycle, start all over again? And that's the topic of today. And we're going to do that from this very, very seemingly unrelated mitzvah that we have in this week's Torah portion, which is the mitzvah of Brit Milah, or circumcision. Ali, can you get us started?
Sure.
Next 1A.
And on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised.
Okay. And the Torah Kohanim, or otherwise known as Sifra, which is a medrash, for lack of a better description, but it's got a lot of exegesis, which means kind of extrapolation from the text, expounds on this. Go ahead, Ali.
Okay. Sorry, it took a second.
That's okay.
On the 8th, one might assume that it may be performed either on the 8th day or on its preceding night. To clarify, the Torah adds on the 8th day that it must be performed during the day. However, this only teaches us that an 8-day-old newborn must be circumcised by day. But how about one who is circumcised on day 9, 10, or 11? From where do we know that a delayed Brit may also not be performed at night?
Hold on, that's not the end. There's one more line. I don't click. Yeah, go ahead. To resolve this.
To resolve this, the Torah adds, and on the 8th day.
Okay, so thank you very much. This is classic Gemara. This is classic, Talmudic extrapolation. There's an extra letter. There's an extra word, right? It clearly says uvayom hashmini, which means and on the 8th day. That's not only an extra word, but an extra letter, the letter vav at the beginning. And so from this, we learn out, without getting into all the details, that the mitzvah of milah, the mitzvah of circumcising our sons, has to be done on the 8th day. Now, today, the custom is not only to do it on the 8th day, but actually to do it as early as we can on the 8th day. This is learned out from when Abraham sacrifices, or almost sacrifices, his son with the Akedat Yitzchak on the mountain, etc., the whole shebang. It says, Vayashkim Avraham baboker. At the moment that Abraham got a command from God, he woke up very early in the morning to do so. So we do it as early as we can in the morning. But if we back up a little bit to the first Brit Milah, which means the first time that any Jew circumcised themselves, well, not any Jew, I guess Avraham Avinu circumcised himself as well, but at least the first mass circumcision, it was actually on the same night that the Jewish people left Egypt. A lot happened on that night. One of the things that happened was that the Jewish people circumcised themselves. Yosef Ilan, can I ask you to read for us, please? This is from the Medrash, but behind the scenes of what was going on that night. So a little more well known is the fact that the Jewish people had to bring, of course, the Passover sacrifice, the Paschal lamb, on that night. That's why we have the zeroah, the shank bone, on our Seder plates. And okay, so here's a little behind the scenes. Go for it, Arnold.
The Holy One, blessed be He, wishes to redeem the Israelites, but they lacked merit. What did God do? He called Moses and said to him, "You go circumcise them." Still, many would not commit to undergo the circumcision. To motivate them, God instructed them to prepare the Paschal lamb offering. When Moses prepared the offering, God decreed upon the four winds of the world, and they blew into the Garden of Eden. At his behest, these winds imbued the aromas of Eden into the smell of Moses' offering. Consequently, all the Israelites, faint with craving for the heavenly meat, gathered before Moses, saying, "We beg of you, please let us eat of your Paschal offering." God said, "If you do not become circumcised, you shall not eat of this merit." As the verse relates, God said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the decree of the Paschal offering. No one uncircumcised may eat from it." Immediately, they gave themselves over and underwent circumcision, and the blood thereof mingled with the blood of the Paschal offering. God then passed among the people and picked each one up, kissing and blessing them.
Thank you, Arnold. So it turns out, if you think about it, by the way, for even half a moment, when God took the Jewish people out of Egypt, they were meritorious parnun, I think is the way you say it. For absolutely no reason. There was no merit that the Jewish people had, like, oh, they're such an amazing people, I'm going to take them out of Egypt. There wasn't even a single mitzvah that they were doing at the time. And Hashem needed something to be able to kind of, land the entire zechut, the entire merit for why they deserve to go out of Egypt. So he said, you know what, I'll have them do the Paschal offering. And I'll have them do Brit Milah, and I want them to be circumcised. The problem was the Jewish people weren't doing it. So God had to get a little involved, because he did want to take them out of Egypt. And he created this whole ruse where he created this delicious, delicious smell, where everybody wants to have some of Moses' Paschal offering. And therefore the Jewish people came and they wanted a piece. And Moses said, hey, the Torah says clearly that you cannot have it, and you cannot eat from the Paschal offering unless you're circumcised. And then all the Jewish people went and circumcised themselves. This story is told over elsewhere in the Medrash also, with slightly less detail. Arnold, you want to continue reading for us this one as well?
Yes. The Israelites said, Moses, our teacher, gives us something we can eat. He answered them, God said to me, As a rule, no uncircumcised male may eat of the paschal offering. Immediately, every one of the Israelites placed his sword upon his thigh and circumcised himself.
Wow. All right. So the Jewish people circumcised themselves on that day. All right.
Whoa. I hope they didn't circumcise that.
No, hopefully not. Now, today, here's the question that I'd really like to discuss with you. You see, there's a very interesting phenomenon going on over here. We just spoke about the fact that it says clearly in this week's Parsha, Uvayom Hashmini Yimo B'Sar Alatum, that on the day, on the 8th day, specifically the 8th day, you should circumcise yourself. The problem is that the injunction to perform milah specifically during the day is contrasted by a perplexing event. The Jews were circumcised that first night that they left Egypt. In other words, they specifically circumcised themselves at night, and God orchestrated this whole production in order that should happen. So, look, I don't fully understand why the mitzvah of Brit Milah would have to be by day, but how? I guess it's a twofold question. Number one is, how can the Jewish people circumcise themselves by night? And I guess the answer to that technical question is, how are they allowed to do it, is because the prohibition, not the prohibition, but the injunction to specifically circumcise yourself during the day, which is actually, by the way, just to fill you in here, if a person does go ahead and circumcise their son by night, they're actually required to re-circumcise them the next morning. Now, obviously, they can't re-circumcise them. They're already circumcised. What they do is they just prick and take out a little blood. And they make the blessing again. Because basically the circumcision, which is the same thing that people do if they were circumcised at birth by some sort of hospital procedure and didn't, and it wasn't done by a Jew and it wasn't done for the mitzvah, so they do the same thing when they're older. Same idea. The real question here is, I guess the technical question of how the Jewish people were able to do it is that these details about the fact that what we are reading in this week's parasha about the Brit Milah needing to be done by day, that's something that kind of came later with the giving of the Torah. So I guess the answer would be that they didn't really have that prohibition yet. But the real question is, if the mitzvah of circumcision is somehow connected to the daytime, then why would God have orchestrated it that it should be by night? He could have somehow orchestrated it that it could have been during the day. The Rebbe asked this question very well. Text 3. Phil, can you read for us, please?
The story needs clarification. Granted, inasmuch as this was before Matan Torah, the Jews were still allowed to circumcise at night, as it wasn't yet prohibited. But on a deeper level, why would God specifically orchestrate the event to take place at night? The Midrash describes many uncircumcised Jews being miraculously compelled to perform the Brit by God decreeing upon the four winds of the world, causing an irresistible fragrance to be exuded from Moses' paschal lamb. Why then couldn't the same or similar miracle have been orchestrated by God so that the Jews would be told, no one uncircumcised may eat from it and perform the mitzvah properly during the day?
Okay, fairly straightforward question. All right, so here's our question. The mitzvah of milah is best performed during the day. Why were the Jews commanded to perform the circumcision at night? Now, before we unpack this mitzvah, or this medrash, and understand exactly why the mitzvah was done by night and not by day, specifically the first time, let's take a minute, if we can, to just talk about what has happened since that day. Okay, the mitzvah of circumcision has really become kind of part and parcel of the Jewish people. It's become not only part and parcel, but it's become kind of it's very interesting. From that day forward, for the most part, milah, the mitzvah of the Brit Milah, has been something that Jews have been willing to give up their lives for. There have been times when it's been banned, that they have really taken long strides, as we'll see in just a moment, to do it. And I'll mention that even till today, I'll share an example of that in a minute, but of people who maybe don't keep much of Judaism, but specifically Brit Milah circumcision, they do. Let's start with a story from the Talmud. Shlomo, can I ask you to read this story for us? Here it is in Hebrew. It's a long story, Shlomo. Can I ask you to read a long story?
Yeah.
Go for it.
On the whole thing? Oy. Okay.
It's a wonderful story, though, if I may say so.
Okay. Our sages taught once the Romans forbade the circumcision of Jewish boys, And it was at the time that Rabbeinu HaKodesh was born, his father, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, said, God commanded us to perform the bris, and these evildoers decree that we may not. How can we put off God's decree and carry out the whims of some evil man? And like that, he defiantly performed the circumcision. Before long, the Romans found out, and Rabbi Shimon was ordered to appear before the Roman governor of his town. Why did you violate the emperor's edict? Asked the frustrated governor. Rabbi Gamliel replied simply, this is what God commanded. Listen, said the governor, I have much respect for you as you are your people's leader, but in as much as you act directly, violated an imperial edict, I cannot let this pass. Do as you please, was the rabbi's response. What do you want to do with me? I've decided to send you, your wife, and your circumcised child to the emperor, replied the Roman. He will decide what to do with you. Rabbi Shimon and his wife set out on a long journey to the imperial court. After traveling for a whole day, they arrived at a hotel owned by Severus, the father of Antoninus, who had also just been born. Rabbi Shimon's wife and the non-Jewish hostess soon began talking. What brings you here? She asked. The rabbi's wife told her the truth. I just circumcised my son, and now I and my husband and my newborn are being sent to Rome, where we will likely be killed. Upon hearing this, the horrified hostess immediately offered to exchange her son, Antonius, for Rabbi Shimon's baby, Yehuda. She gratefully accepted the offer and continued on the journey with the uncircumcised baby while leaving her son behind in the care of the kind hostess. Upon their arrival, they were shown into the emperor's court and found their town's governor already there. This woman violated the emperor's decree and circumcised her child, he accused. I have now brought them here. Please do with her as you wish. Upon hearing the charges, the emperor ordered the baby examined. Obviously, there was no sign that a circumcision has been performed. I decreed against circumcision, and you have brought me an untouched baby, raged the emperor. Some dignitaries familiar with the story who were also present came to the defense of the governor. We can attest that this baby was circumcised, but these Jews are close to their God, and when they call, he answers. The emperor summarily, there we go, thank you. My tongue gets twisted sometimes. The emperor summarily had the accusing governor executed, rescinded the decree forbidding circumcision, and sent the Jewish couple away in peace. When they exchanged back their children, Antonius's mother said, since a miracle was performed through me and my son for you and your son, let us and our children remain forever friends, which is indeed what happened. On account of the breast milk that Antonius nursed from Rabbeinu HaKodesh's mother, he merited to wait upon the eventual leader of the Jewish people and to study Torah from him. Eventually, he became emperor, and it was said to have inherited a place in the world to come.
Thank you, Shlomo. Wow, what a story. So a couple of things here. First of all, for those of you that are not familiar, Rabbeinu HaKadosh is the author, or I should say the compiler of the Mishnah, otherwise known just affectionately as Rebbe. His name was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, or Judah the Prince. You can read more about him if you'd like by Googling him, or just looking him up anywhere, any Mishnah. He's the one behind it, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. So he really he really advanced kind of Jewish learning. He was the first one to even begin taking the oral Torah and writing it down. He noticed that the Jewish people were being dispersed, and it was time to start writing it down. In any event, one of the reasons why he was able to do all that is because of his friendship with Antoninus, who a lot of people point out is Marcus Aurelius, who had a very, very friendly relationship with the Jewish people and was the emperor in Rome. And because of that relationship that he had with Rabbeinu HaKadosh, therefore, Rabbeinu HaKadosh had that ability to compile this Mishnah and author it and have it spread throughout the Jewish people, etc., because there was kind of a break between all the torment that the Jewish people were suffering at the time. Leaving that as it would be, this is only one story. You might be thinking to yourself, well, she must have been a very, very holy woman if she gave up her life to have her son circumcised. So allow me, if I may, I'll read to you. This story is not in the curriculum here. Right, but obviously here's the question on the table. What is it about Brit Milah that Jews have refused to part with? So before we get to that, allow me to share with you another story, which is from much more recent. This is from Stalinist Russia. This was recently printed in a magazine. It was Stalinist Russia. The sudden banging on the door made the occupants' blood run cold. The knocking was getting louder. They were about to sneak out the back exit when the older of the two suggested that the younger one stay behind. It was better to wait a few minutes before opening the door. The banging continued even more vigorously. "Who's there?" the youngster called out, but the stranger refused to identify himself. The youth flung open the door. Standing there was a high-ranking officer of the KGB. "Is this where the Shochet lives?" the officer demanded. "Shochet," he replied. "There is no one here by the name of Shochet." The officer gave him a penetrating look and said, "Then perhaps there's someone here who cuts children." "No," he said in the most confident tone he could muster. For a moment, the stranger said nothing. Then he whispered in the boy's ear, "Don't deny it. I know that the man who cuts children lives here." The youth was shocked, for the man had uttered these words in Yiddish. "I am a Jew. 7 days ago, my wife gave birth to a baby boy, and I want very much for him to be entered into the covenant of Abraham. My wife is very much opposed to the idea. Tomorrow at exactly 9 a.m, she will be leaving the house. I am begging you to come by my house tomorrow and bring the mohel. The baby will be in one of the front rooms." The officer told the astounded youngster his address and hurried away. "Remember," he said pleadingly, "tomorrow is the 8th day of my son's life. I implore you to do me this favor." Reb Isaac was the only shochet and mohel in the entire city, and Yaakov, a boy with no living relatives in the world, had been taken in to live with the shochet and accompanied him on his holy and very dangerous rounds. The officer left. Was it a trap? Yaakov was convinced that it was a clever ruse cooked up to catch Reb Isaac red-handed. When Reb Isaac came home, Yaakov filled him in on everything. The chassid thought for several minutes, the deep wrinkles that lined his forehead testifying to his inner conflict and turmoil. He had reached a decision. "Tomorrow morning we will go to the officer's house to enter his son into the covenant of Abraham." The following day, Reb Isaac and his ward arose at dawn and recited their prayers. They then set out in the direction of the river. On the way, the chassid explained that he was almost certain that this was indeed a trap. He therefore wished to immerse himself in a mikveh before they continued. "If this be our last day on earth, at least we will die in a state of ritual purity," he declared. The officer's house was located on one of the finest streets in the city, which only served to confirm their suspicions. The neighborhood was inhabited by the highest-ranking members of the KGB and their families. But the two Jews stuck to their decision. Rabbi Isaac and Yaakov secreted themselves in a hiding place across from the officer's house. Seconds later, they saw a woman dressed in the latest fashion exit the building and proceed down the block. Together, they strode across the street. Rabbi Isaac knocked on the massive door. An older woman opened the door and motioned for them to enter. In the corner of the room was a beautiful crib, inside which a tiny baby was sleeping peacefully. They ran over and picked up the child, whereupon a small white envelope fell out. Inside the envelope was a letter from the baby's father, apologizing for his not being able to be present at the bris of his son, and asking that they give the baby a Jewish name. The rest of the letter was an emotional statement of his thanks and appreciation for the great mitzvah they were doing, without their even knowing who he was. Rabbi Isaac quickly and deftly performed the bris, while Yaakov acted as sandik. The sandik is the one who holds the baby while the bris is being performed. They were about to leave when the woman who had opened the door suddenly appeared and motioned for them to stay put. Yaakov was terrified. Seconds later, however, the woman brought out a brand new frying pan and handed them a dozen eggs, a veritable fortune. She invited them to make themselves omelets. The young boy was so malnourished, so starved, that the eggs went down with no effort at all. After they finished eating and were about to leave, the woman presented them with a huge sack of bread, another gift from the Russian officer. Such a quantity of bread was something the average citizen could only dream of. But how could they walk down the street carrying the bag? Surely they would attract the attention of the ever-watchful police. The woman suddenly understood why the two Jews hesitated to accept the priceless gift. She opened the drawer, ripped off a wad of coupons from a booklet, and handed them over. Many months later, Yaakov was walking down the street when the same Russian officer stopped him. I must thank you again from the bottom of my heart. I have one more request to make of you. Whenever you make a bris, you should tell my story. Let everyone know that even in Soviet Russia, there are still Jews who have a warm spot in their heart for Judaism. This request led to a tradition in Yaakov's family. He is honored with being Sandik in commemoration of the role he played in that bris so very long ago. And he relates the story of the Russian officer from beginning to end with great enthusiasm and fervor. L'chaim. Yidden. These are Yidden that are willing to at all costs to make sure that a mitzvah is done. Before we
It is
continue the
the
class,
mitzvah that everybody does, I feel.
it is one, right?
No matter how like religious, not religious, I feel like it's always done. Like there's
Absolutely. This is what I'm getting. So it's very interesting because I told you a story now from the times of the Gemara. I told you a story from Stalinist Russia, and I'll share with you a story from 3 years ago. 3 years ago, Arnold can attest to this story. He was present. A man walked into Chabad, walks into the back of shul. There was a minyan going on. It was early in the morning. And he says, in 2 hours from now, there's a bris happening in my home. He was under the impression for some reason that you need to have a minyan and a bris. I don't know why. And he said, I would love if a few members of the community would come by and make a minyan for this bris milah, for this circumcision, of my son. I said, interesting. Are you Jewish? He goes, no, I'm not. My wife is, which makes the boy Jewish. I said, interesting. Who's doing the brit milah? He had one of the well-known mohels from Los Angeles. Forget his name. He's originally from Montreal. Okay, no problem. I show up at the house. We brought a few Jews with us. I don't know if we ended up making a minyan or we didn't. Either way, a few of us arrive at the house. Sure enough, a house here in Pasadena. That's where his parents live. This man and his wife live. I'm in touch with them till today. I just sent them shmura matzah before Passover. They live like 3 hours north of here. Not even by Bakersfield, like in the middle of nowhere. I forgot what the city's called. They own a ranch. Anyways, here's the kicker, okay? This man is not Jewish. He's married to his wife who is Jewish, and they have 3 sons. Every single one of their sons is circumcised. To the best of my knowledge, they don't keep anything else of the Torah and mitzvahs. Maybe Passover they get together. To the best of my knowledge, they don't. But here's the kicker, okay? I arrived at the house, and 3 generations of the family were present. The father of the baby and the mother. The mother is Jewish, the father is not. The mother's mother, who is Jewish, was present. In other words, the bubby of the baby boy who's having his bris was present, and her husband, who is not Jewish. And her mother was present. In other words, the elder bubby, or the great-grandmother of the baby, was also present. She was an elderly woman, maybe in her 80s, whatever it was. She was present. Her husband was not. I think maybe her husband passed away. Her husband was not Jewish. Okay? So here is a baby boy that is born 4th generation intermarried families. Okay? Which is no wonder that a lot of their Judaism disappeared, which is why they live somewhere not close to any shul. To the best of my knowledge, they're not in touch with any other Chabad other than the Chabad in Pasadena, which is where their mother happens to live. And I go to their mother lives in Altadena. And I go to their mother all the time, and I deliver matzah and mishloach manot, etc. I don't think she's one step foot in shul. Although she's very appreciative that I bring everything, etc. A lot of Judaism has disappeared from their family, and hopefully one day it'll all spark back. But one thing has remained very steadfast, and that is brit milah, circumcision. And that's what leads us, and this is from 3 years ago. And actually, by the way, I forgot. He just texted me or called me, whatever it was, about 3, 4, 5 months ago. I think he called me about something. He wanted some question about something. The only rabbi that he knows. So he says, Rabbi, by the way, I had another boy. We had him circumcised, but it was a very small affair because of COVID or whatever. And that's why we didn't even call you. Otherwise, we for sure would have called you. He just wanted to let me know that he had another boy, and that boy was circumcised. Which leads us to the question, what is it about brit milah that Jews have refused to part with? Anybody?
Well, it's a command.
It's a deep.
One second. Let me start with that one. It's a command. Phil, was that you?
Yes.
I think there's 613 of them, no? You tell me, do you think circumcision is one of the easier ones to do?
No.
Certainly not. All you have to do is ask any mother. If there's any mothers present here that circumcised, that had their children circumcised, you know it's not from the easier ones to do for a mother. Yeah, go ahead, Marilyn.
It's a deep identity, and it opens doors for children who maybe not come from religious families or observant families. They know who they belong to. They know they belong to the Jewish people. And if they want to become more observant and step into a synagogue, they are welcome anywhere in the world. And they know that.
I think that would be true even if they didn't have a bris milah, even if they didn't have a circumcision, as it is in Russia, for instance, where a lot of boys during the same period, well, not during Stalinist Russia, but during communist Russia, many of them were not circumcised, and as a result, Chabad deals with a lot of circumcisions of older boys and older men, etc. And they know that they're still welcome even if they don't have a circumcision. But I think you're touching on something very deep, which is
it's something so intimate. It's so intimate.
Not just it's intimate. I think also it's arguably the most transformative mitzvah a person can do. I don't know of any other mitzvah that a person can literally transform their body. They do something to their body, and for the rest of their life, their body is different as a result of that mitzvah. And I think the fact that finite beings can follow a divine command with physical objects, that's something that's very powerful. In other words, to make that change in physicality and to know that that connects us with something that's completely not physical, I think that's unique to Brit Milah. And for the women on the group, we will be talking about you in just a minute. If you think this robs you of that connection, absolutely not. For now, let's just see what we're saying here about the importance of a Brit in the verses themselves. So there's actually a verse in Devarim which talks about the Brit Milah, but more about the spiritual effect that it has. Phil, can you read for us, please?
Rabbi, I don't know. I can read too.
Okay. You said, I'm sorry, was that me?
Yeah, that was for you. Sorry, Marguerite was telling me that she can read as well. Simcha Bracha, we'll give you a chance in a minute.
You shall circumcise the arlah of your heart, and no more shall you be stiff-necked.
Very interesting. So this is a verse from Devarim which talks about circumcision as something that we do in our hearts. In other words, at the same time that a person is physically circumcising themselves, there's something that's supposed to be going on in their heart. Okay? And what is this circumcision that's going on in our heart? In other words, what is the foreskin? What is the arla that we're getting rid of from in our heart? Keep going, Phil. This is Rashi.
The arlah of your heart refers to the blockage and covering of the heart.
So it turns out, thank you, Phil, it turns out that a Brit Milah, while it's also a physical action, is also a spiritual kind of cleansing that we do, that if there's something that's blocking, there's something that's dividing between us and the Almighty, we want to remove that from our heart, right? If there's something blocking our spiritual conduit between the finite and the divine, we by removing that blockage, that's what we do. So here's where we get to, considering all the aspects that we just introduced, it's very telling that women are not commanded to circumcise themselves. It's actually, instead of it being very anti-feminist, it's actually very feminist. It's something that's very, very interesting that the Torah is pointing out something very interesting about women. You know, the Talmud uses the term that Isha, a woman, keman de mehila damya. It's as if she's already circumcised. Okay, now, not that this is that relevant, but just to give you the background, a woman is actually allowed to circumcise a boy. One of the most famous circumcisions, or at least the most dramatic circumcisions, was when Tzipora, Moshe's wife, circumcised their son. And according to halacha, any woman can circumcise a boy. This is despite the fact that a non-Jew cannot circumcise a Jewish boy. And the reason for that is, wait for it, because he is not circumcised. Therefore, because he doesn't have this connection to this particular mitzvah, therefore he cannot do that to the boy. Which begs the question, a woman is not either circumcised, so how come she can circumcise a boy? And the answer that the Talmud gives is because Isha keman de mehila damya, because a woman is as if she's already circumcised. A woman is as if they're born circumcised.
Huh?
What was that?
We don't have blockage.
You see, exactly, Ali. You see where this is going. Now, any man, I don't know if any man, but most men and women that have a relationship with other men and women can tell you that this is something that women have had for time immemorial. If you turn back to Abraham, you see that there's a certain spirituality that his wife had, which he did not have. In fact, the Torah tells us, or I should say Hashem commands Abraham in the Torah that everything that Sarah tells you, you should listen to her. And the reason for that is because she has a very special spiritual intuition. We actually have a full class on this. The week that my daughter was born, my daughter's name is Bina. It was also the week that woman is created, Parshat Bereshit, when man and woman are created. We pointed out that when it says the woman was created, it says Vayiven we had the exact terminology, but basically it says that she was built from the rib. We point out the word vayiven is very similar to the word bina, because bina yetera nodatla, there's an extra special intuition, a spiritual intuition that a woman has. I can go on and on here, by the way. This is why women, when it came to the golden calf, that's the text we have here. The women were specifically the only ones, I think, them and Shevet Levi were the only ones that refrained from this. We have to ask a woman to read this one. Ali, can you read for us, please? Text 7.
When collecting gold for the golden calf, the men first approached the women asking for their jewelry. The women stood up to them and said, "Never will we forsake our God who has just performed for us such miracles and might. Hashem forbid that we should fashion an idol." When the men saw that the women refused to take part, they stripped themselves of the golden earrings that were on their ears. It does not say on their wives' ears, but rather on their ears.
So what's going on here, if you're not familiar with the full story of the golden calf was built by the Jewish people throwing all of their jewelry into a fire, their golden jewelry into a fire, and out of that came the golden calf, without getting into all the details. All of that jewelry was men's jewelry, not women's jewelry.
Mm-hmm.
The women did not take part in this sin. I could go on and on here, by the way, but I'll do 2 more and then we'll stop, okay? Because I'm starting to feel bad for the men. The Talmud tells us, for those of you that are familiar, we are currently in the days of the Omer, which means 49 days that we count between Passover and Shavuot. And because there is a tractate in the Talmud that is 49 pages long, namely Tractate Sota, therefore many people have the custom to learn this tractate. 4 days ago, it's already 6 days ago. 6 days ago, on the 11th day of the Omer, we read page 11b. On page 11b of Sota, the Talmud shares with us that it was bischut or bischar nashim tzidkaniyot shahayu ba'oto ador nigalu Yisrael mitzrayim. That was specifically because of the Jewish women, the faith and the trust that the Jewish women had in God, that the Jewish people were taken out of Egypt. And I'll share one more on the verse, which says, "Vatikach Miriam at hatof asher hatof biyada." Says that Miriam was, after the Jewish people left Egypt and they went through the splitting of the sea, and they come out on the other side and they had seen all these miracles. Miriam led the Jewish women in an orchestra, and says Miriam took a tambourine in her hands. Tupim u'mechalot, they had all sorts of instruments, the women. They were all prepared to sing a song and praise God for the beautiful miracles that they had seen. This is why in my house we still have a tambourine hanging till today. Why?
They knew it would happen.
Exactly, because the women were the only ones who truly believed, even though all the Jewish people were told that they were going to leave Egypt. It was specifically the women that believed with such perfect emunah, with such perfect faith in God. So they don't have spiritual blockages, women. This is why, I'll just end off that thought from earlier, this is why Gitti has hanging in one of the closets in our room, we have a tambourine hanging, because she says, I don't want to feel like an idiot, that Mashiach is going to come and all the women will have their instruments ready, and I'm going to be the one that doesn't have it. I have a tambourine ready for when Mashiach comes.
That's nice.
We'll be able to. Anyways, so leaving all this aside, what is the significance? So we're asking, what is the element? What is so special about the mitzvah of Mila? Number one is that it removes the spiritual blockage, and that's a very powerful and fundamental thing that we have to have, because if we're going to have a relationship with the Almighty, the first thing you want to do is remove anything that's blocking you from having a relationship with the Almighty. Okay. Element number two is represented by the fact that the mitzvah of Brit Milah is actually done on the 8th day, specifically. Anybody ever think about that? The fact that a child is only 8 days old when they have a Brit Milah? It's almost a little bit counterintuitive, as we'll see from this conversation between Yitzchak and Yishmael. You see, Yitzchak and Yishmael, Isaac and Ishmael, two children of Abraham, both gave themselves a Brit Milah on the same day that Abraham did. But on that day, Yishmael did it the same day that Abraham did, which was when he was 13 years old, and Yitzchak, who was born a year later, he was circumcised on the 8th day. And they would often have this conversation. Simcha Bracha, can you read for us, please?
Definitely.
You're getting a lot of feedback.
Okay, it sounds like something I don't know what. Can you hear me?
Now we hear you much better. Yes, you muted one of them.
Thank you. Isaac and Ishmael argued. Ishmael declared, I am more cherished than you because I was circumcised at the age of 13. Isaac retorted, I am more cherished than you because I was circumcised at age 8 days.
So which one is the right day to circumcise yourself? In other words, which one is the better day to circumcise yourself? Is it the day that at 8 days old or 13 years? Let's talk about it for a second. At 8 days old, at 8 days old, you have absolutely no choice in the matter.
Choice, yeah.
At 13 years old, you've made a choice to do it. So Yishmael was saying, 1 second, I chose to do a brit milah. And Yitzchak was pointing out, you're right, you chose it. But that means that for the rest of your life, your relationship with God is predicated by the fact that you chose it. How can you ever reach a level of being selfless? It's always going to be built on something selfish, which is, I understand, right? I understand that there's a relationship with God we had, and that's why I do it. It's all about me. I'm the one who chose it. And I could have chosen differently, of course. Everybody with me here, or am I losing people here? Mm-hmm. Even though Yishmael did have the benefit that he chose to do the Brit Milah, right? He did not have the benefit of it being something that he was born with, which is, by the way, that's the most similar that a man can get to a woman, which is that it's done when he's so young that he doesn't choose it, so it becomes so inborn within him. Obviously, a woman is born that way. By the way, one more thing that we see a difference between a boy and a girl when they're born is that a boy has to wait until 8 days old before he's given a Jewish name, because his neshama doesn't finish coming in or it doesn't continue coming in until that day. A woman can be named as soon as she's born, if she's reading the Torah, etc., because their neshama comes in immediately. Anyways, so it turns out there are two elements to a circumcision that are very, very powerful. Number one is removing the foreskin, and number two is the 8th day element. Okay. So now we understand what a Brit Milah is about. And now let's see what's going on here on the first night of when the Jewish people are leaving Egypt, right? Being a slave in Egypt meant being steeped in a very deep quagmire. Right? The Jewish people, the Jewish people were steeped in a land which was full of idol worship, physical bondage, spiritual depravity, etc. Yet they come to the exodus from Egypt, and Hashem wants to somehow remove them from this deep spiritual bondage. In the Haggadah, we actually credit the matzah with this. Ron, can I ask you to read for us a little bit? This is from the Shalah HaKadosh.
Haggadah, if the Holy One, blessed be He, had not taken our fathers out of Egypt, then we, our children and our children's children, would have remained enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. To explain, after so many years in Egypt, the Jews were nearly entirely subsumed into evil. They had already entered the 49th stage of impurity, and were they to remain in Egypt even for another moment, they would have entered the 50th and final stage from which there is no return. Heaven, Hashem forbid. This then is what the verse states, and I redeemed you from bondage, namely the spiritual servitude of Egypt. And I did not allow the chametz to rise, namely the Jews were redeemed from the 50th gate of impurity. Thus, between the Hebrew words matzah and chametz is only a small dot, the broken leg of the hay that sets it apart from the chak.
So the hay and the chet, that's the difference between the two words chametz and matzah. One of them has a chet mem and tzaddik, one of them has a hay mem and tzaddik.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
This then is the answer to the question in the Ma Nishtana, why this night is only matzah.
Okay. So this is how the Shalah explains what was going on here. So it turns out that the Jewish people were actually very, very deeply entrenched in Egyptian culture. So much so, by the way, that there were many Jews who did not want to leave Egypt. Okay. Here's the question. How was it possible for God to take these Jewish people who were so steeped in physical and spiritual bondage and rip them out and pull them out? The only way for that to happen was for God to come down from above and to do something very powerful with them that would cause that to happen. Now, of course, here we're crediting the matzah. You know the difference between the little space, the little broken leg of the hay versus the chet, which is full. But what's going on here is that something had to happen from God that could not have happened by anybody else. And it was precisely for this reason that it needed to be at night. Where are we holding here? Alan, you said you didn't want to read, right? So, Kalman, we're back to you. Go ahead.
The Zohar describes the night of the Exodus. That night shone like a bright summer day. The entire nation saw the judgment God was meting out. This is the meaning of the verse. The night will light up like the day. As darkness, so is light. The description implies that the earth was illuminated on that entire night. In fact, some commentators use this Zohar to resolve the difficulty as how the Jews could circumcise themselves at night because it wasn't considered night at all. Well, because it wasn't considered night at all. Now, what seems to be behind the Zohar's assertion that the night shone is the language used by the Torah. It is a night of anticipation for God to take them out of the land of Egypt. This night is God's. To explain, when discussing the creation narrative, our sages point out that as opposed to day and goodness, night and evil never appear in the same sentence as God. Therefore, as God's name appears here in the description of the night, it must be that it wasn't really night at all, but rather it shone like the sun. It turns out that night of the Exodus, the qualities of both night and day in relation to Mila, and night in relation to Korban Pesach. Hence, the verse, the night will light up like the day.
Brit Milah is particularly dear to the Jewish people because it lies at the core of our relationship with God. By physically imprinting godliness in our flesh and doing it specifically on the 8th day when it's something beyond nature, it's something that's inborn within us, etc., we symbolize a connection with God that is supernatural, that doesn't depend on our intellect. It doesn't depend, it's physically changed us. We are physically connected to Him in a way that will forever be that way, irregardless of our understanding. For this reason, it was specifically this mitzvah that Hashem wanted the Jewish people to do in order to merit the exodus from Egypt, in order to merit leaving Mitzrayim. Now, because the Jewish people were in a spiritual darkness, let's call it a spiritual night, that's why Hashem said, you know what? This mitzvah of Brit Milah, I want it to specifically happen at night. Why? Because I want to symbolize for every single Jew, in every single generation, whether it be in 2021 and they'll be on Frashtuk and Zoom, it doesn't make a difference. They should know that even if it's the darkest night, I can make the night shine like the day if you will just do that one step for me. If you will forge that connection for me. If you will remove that blockage from your heart and make that one step to make that connection to me. And in just a few moments, we'll see exactly how that applies to our everyday lives. Of course, we have to start with the Mishnah from Tractate Pesachim, which tells us, B'chol dor vador, in every generation, a person is obligated to regard himself as if he personally left Egypt, right? We all know that the word Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim. Hold on. The word Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim, which means boundaries, right? Or constriction, or things that hold us back in life. And every once in a while, we know that there's a part of our Judaism which is holding us back, right? And we want to understand, we want to recognize that we want to get out of that Egypt, just like the Jewish people left Egypt. How can we do that? From here comes the lesson from Brit Milah on the first night of Egypt. What happens if I'm a little stuck in my cycle of Egypt? Remember all the way at the beginning of class? Some of you thought we would never get here, right? All the way at the beginning of class, we discussed what happens if I'm stuck in a series of bad habits. I'm stuck in a rut where it's going over and over and over again, the same bad habits over and over and over again. And anytime I try to get out of it, I just feel like I take one step forward and two steps backwards. From here comes the lesson from this week's Torah portion, and from the fact that the Jewish people, did the mitzvah of Brit Milah specifically on the first night that they left Egypt in order to forge that connection with God. Before we continue, let's discuss this for a second. Which part of Judaism feels unattainable to you? Right? A lot of times there's something, whether it's something in our thought process, we have to make that mental shift about whatever part of Judaism, whether it's making that leap into kosher, or whether it's keeping Shabbos, or whether it's starting to put on tefillin every day, whatever it is. Very often it's a mental block. Sometimes it's not a mental block. It's a speech block. In other words, it's something that's hard for us in our speech. And sometimes it's our actions, right? Our thought, our speech, and our actions. The three ways with which we interact with the world. And there are very often moments or mitzvahs or certain things that to us seem like a Mitzrayim. With regards to this mitzvah, I'm stuck. And here the Rebbe has some very, very profound advice. Ron, can I ask you to read for us, please? Text 13. What? You skip one?
We have found and noted.
Hold on. Well, we're going to skip this one for now. Text 13. Here you go. Go ahead. There you go.
Oh, okay. The function of a garment is to enhance the wearer, and when used effectively, it can even make a downright ugly person appear genuinely beautiful. According to Kabbalah, the same applies to the garments of the soul, namely thought, speech, and action. For instance, a fool who repeats a wise person's words, anyone hearing him will assume he is brilliant. Or a naturally mean-spirited person, if he actually does good, people will see him as naturally good. Hasidic thought explains that a mystic energy within them is what enables our simple garments to enhance our core. Now, if this transformative effect is true of any garment, then the garments we use to perform Torah and mitzvot must be all the more life-changing. There are 2 points to consider here. A, throughout the entire duration of performing any mitzvah, and regardless of your current religious status or spiritual state, God dwells and is outfitted inside you. After all, you are wearing his garments. Hence, our sages mandate to stand in respect for someone performing a mitzvah, even when that person is completely unlearned. B, not only can you bask in the temporary aura of a mitzvah, but also the transformative energy of its garments will effect lasting change in you. Hence our sages' insistence that we perform mitzvot regardless of our current feelings of inspiration. In fact, we are urged to perform mitzvot even if we are motivated by entirely ulterior motives, because their spiritual light will eventually lead you to do it for its own sake. Moreover, the sages' wording mitok shelo lishma ba lishma can be read at once the core of uninspired behavior. There is inspiration. In other words, because your superconsciousness desires connection with God, your performance of a mitzvah, despite not being consciously aware of it, allows for you deepest self to be expressed.
Thank you, Ron. If that went a little over your head, I urge you to, I'm going to explain in very simple words. In short, what the Rebbe is telling us is the power of a mitzvah. If that went over your head, I encourage you to pay attention now, because this is some very powerful stuff, and it can be life-changing. Okay? What is the power of a mitzvah? You know, they once came to the Alter Rebbe, founder of Chabad Hasidus, with a complaint. They said, you know, your Hasidim are guilty of pretending to love and fear God. They daven for hours and they do all these things, and they don't necessarily mean it sincerely. And the Alter Rebbe said, you know what? Let them, he quoted these words from the Mishnah, which the Rebbe quoted, mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, which means when you start off doing it not for the sake of heaven, eventually you will reach for the sake of heaven. And he said, and he explained these words, and this is what the Rebbe is explaining here. Hold on just 1 second. And he said, it's not just that when you do something not for the sake of heaven, eventually you'll reach a stage of doing it for the sake of heaven. He said like this: It's not just fake it till you make it. The faking it will bring the making it. There is something in uninspired service of God, when you do something and you don't get why you're doing it, that can bring about serving God properly. Why? Because that's the unique power of a mitzvah. You know, when we Chabadniks, and I did it for 2 years, 3 years, I drove a mitzvah tank from Crown Heights, Brooklyn, to Manhattan. I was parking on the streets, and I was one of those nudniks. So I would stand on the street and I would ask the passersby, I would say, "Excuse me, sir, are you Jewish?" And they would come over to me and they would say, and I would get attitude from some of them. You know Manhattan, New Yorkers. And I would get attitude from some of them, and then every once in a while we'd find a Jew, and that Jew, we'd ask him to put on tefillin, and he would keep going on his way. And every once in a while, a religious Jew would stop by and be like, "What are you Chabadniks doing? You think with this one mitzvah, you're doing anything to this person?" He ate pork right before he put on tefillin with you. He ate pork together with cheese in McDonald's. And now right afterwards, he's about to go God knows what. And with this moment that he stood on Fifth Avenue and he put on tefillin with you, you think you're changing? You're not doing anything. Well, I beg to differ. The power of a mitzvah is such that it affects our levushim. Our levushim are our garments. The garments that when Chassidus talks about garments, what it talks about are the three ways we interact with the world: thought, speech, and action. Why are these called garments? Because your thought is your power of thinking. But at any moment, you can take your thought and enclose it. In other words, it can be a garment for any particular thought that you want to put. You want to put in your mind. So if you're thinking a positive thought, that's amazing. If you're thinking a negative thought, that's terrible. Same thing with your speech, right? Power of speech is something you always have. Sometimes you're davening, that speech is amazing. Sometimes we're talking lashon hara, we're talking negatively about other people, and that's terrible. Same thing with our actions. Of course, we don't even have to get into it. A mitzvah and an aveira, you can be doing something positive or negative. But they're always interchangeable. At any moment, it can be a good thought, speech, or action, or it can be a bad thought, speech, or action. What happens when you choose to do a mitzvah is that you take your thought, speech, and action, and now godliness itself is enclosed within your garments, within your clothing. And that has two powerful effects, as Ron read for us. I'm summarizing here. Number one, even if before and after you might not be the most spiritual person, during the moment that you're doing that mitzvah, you are completely spiritual because your thought, speech, and action is actually harmonious with God's. And B, as we said, that mitzvah can begin to have a lasting impact on you. Believe it or not, it begins to change your habits. It begins to have an effect on you, and it'll have a lasting impact beyond the moment when you're doing the mitzvah. Look, I don't want to start sharing inspiring stories here, but a lot of those people who stopped with me on Fifth Avenue would come back the next day and say, or whatever, we only did this once a week on Friday, would come back the next week and share with me, usually I have a not kosher lunch, and that week I couldn't bring myself to do it because I just put on tefillin. How can I go and eat a non-kosher lunch? I'm not saying they started eating kosher their whole life, but there's a certain lasting impact that a mitzvah has on a person. That's some very, very powerful stuff. And this is why
Rabbi, let me ask.
Yes, Alan, go ahead.
If doing the mitzvahs have such a powerful impact, how do you take into account people who literally grew up doing the mitzvahs and then went away from Judaism later in life? I mean, there's lots of those people.
A lot of them.
They literally grew up putting on tefillin, davening, and everything, and then they didn't keep it. So if doing the mitzvahs have the effect on you, how do you account for them? If you don't want to answer it right now, I don't want to interrupt things.
I absolutely do want to answer right now, and you're bringing up a very, very good point. And I want to share with you my perspective on this. Let's assume for a moment that it would have been the opposite. Okay, let's imagine a world where it would have been the opposite. Anybody who grew up doing Torah and mitzvahs would never ever leave the path of Judaism, and they would only keep doing Torah and mitzvahs for the rest of their lives. And every person who grew up without doing Torah and mitzvahs would be stuck in it because they never had that impact. And for the rest of their lives, they wouldn't be able to do it because they wouldn't be inspired. To me, that would be much more alarming than the contradiction that you're bringing up right now. You see, we as Jews firmly believe in the fact that every time we're presented with an opportunity to do a mitzvah, we have the choice to do it or not to do it. And we believe that God never takes that choice away from us. And what you're describing, Alan, is a world in which that choice would be gone. These people are a powerful reminder that no matter where you are in life, you will always have the choice to spit God in the face and say, I don't want to, I'm not interested. Or to say, I'm uninspired, and therefore I'm not going to. Or to say, you know what, I just like bacon, so I'm just going to eat it. That's it. That choice will never, ever be taken away from you. Even though I'm religious, and I grew up religious. First of all, I definitely had my moments in life, when I wasn't as excited about Judaism, etc. Like you have your times when you're discovering it as a teenager, etc. But more importantly than that, you think that temptation has disappeared from my life? Please say yes. I'll be flattered.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I'm joking. I think you see very clearly what I'm saying. And I to me, it's such a powerful reminder that freedom of choice will never be taken away from us. So we're not saying that when a person does a mitzvah, he's forced to do another mitzvah. All we're saying is that just like when it comes to a diet, every dietitian will tell you the stupidest move you can do is say, I'll never diet, so therefore I may as well not start. No. Start right now. Okay, you'll diet for one day and then you'll fail, no problem, but you did it today. Eventually, after one step forward, two steps back, step forward, two steps back, eventually you'll be able to move forward. Similarly with a mitzvah. That mitzvah has a very powerful impact on you. And the silliest move we can ever do to ourselves is to say, I'll never be religious, as if religious is like some kind of goal in life. I can share with you because people call me religious. I'll share with you it's not a goal. I'm here and I'm still moving forward. I'm still trying to grow and I'm still working on lots of flaws that I have. So there's never a moment when that stops. Instead, that mitzvah is not going to do anything to me. But what that mitzvah will do is it'll help refine me. It'll help me move forward to the next step. One mitzvah, and then another mitzvah, and then another mitzvah. And even if that mitzvah doesn't lead to another mitzvah tomorrow, and even if it doesn't change me overnight, but you've taken the first step. That's a perfect way actually to end off our class. To remind ourselves that we have more on the side of doing good than there is on the side of the opposite. The Torah tells us, or Hashem tells us, and King David makes it so eloquent at Tehillim. Hashem amar elai beni ata ani hayom lidatecha. Hashem said, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. We are the children of Hashem and he wants us to succeed. And we can choose when we're stuck in that rut, when we're stuck in that Egypt, whatever that Egypt may be, we can choose to rise above it and to transcend our limitations by focusing exclusively on the nearest opportunity for positive growth. Or, as the title of this class puts it, take one step. That's it. Take one step. L'chaim, l'chaim. You're doing one mitzvah. It's not going to change us. It's not going to make us forever the holiest person. As Alan pointed out, we'll still have our freedom of choice. But the road ahead is right in front of you. The only thing you need to do is take that first step. L'chaim, l'chaim. And taking that first step if it's your first step, or that 50th step if it's your 50th step. But whatever it is, time to act. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Good night, all.